And now I want to welcome Stanley Ridgley to the PAS Report. Stanley is a full professor at Drexel University. He is a former Army intelligence officer, and he is the author of a brand new book, Brutal Minds, The Dark World of Left-Wing Brainwashing in Our Universities. It's certainly one of the biggest problems we face because everything bleeds out into the society from the university system. Stanley, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about one of the most pressing issues facing America today. It's the decline of our higher education system, who's doing it and what we can do about it.
It's such an important topic. And one of the things that really jumped out at me when I was reading your book is that you say it's the anti-intellectual takeover. And this is very important in the world of academia, where you have a bunch of people that are posing as intellectuals, but they're not about intellectualism. They're not about trying to seek out the truth or asking questions to get students to think critically. It's been about indoctrination, but it's moved further than that, as you explained. So can you explain to the audience what you mean?
Yeah, certainly. When we think of intellectuals, we think of people who are associated with ideas, who are exploring ideas, who have an open mind, who want to exchange views on various issues. It comes out of the tradition of the American university, which comes out of the German university. The idea of a repository of the best that has been thought and said, based on logic, reason, scientific method, inquiry, progress, improving the human condition, and then passing that patrimony on to the next generations for them to build on. Now, the anti-intellectualists who are, growing on our college campus, their presence is ever growing on our college campuses, don't think of the university that way. In fact, they view the university as a crucible of indoctrination, that they have been admitted into the halls of truth with their particular ideology, which happens to be crypto-Maoist and Marxist. And as a result, they believe that in imposing a very primitive ideology on the college campus, it's a binary, Manichaean binary of good and evil. I say evil and good, oppressors and oppressed, exploiters and exploited, heretics and believers. And of course, they are the believers and we are the heretics. And we, you and me, Nick, and the rest of most of your listeners probably are burdened with false consciousness. We simply don't know what the reality, the social reality around us. And these folks are blessed with what they call critical consciousness, which is the idea that they can peer into society and see its contradictions, see the relationship of power and privilege. And the problem for them is to bring us to critical consciousness, which is basically indoctrination.
It is. And it's been getting worse and worse throughout
Yeah.
the years. I mean, we just had an example recently, and I forget the college that it was on, but where a college professor actually solicited donations from her students for extra credit. And if you didn't contribute to her and her left-wing causes, particularly one was a pro-choice movement, pro-abortion movement, then the student wouldn't be able to get extra credit. At what point did academia change? I mean, let's be honest here. Academia has been controlled by the left for quite some time. It's not like this is really new. We've been hearing calls about progressive indoctrination for 40 years, but something over the course of the last 10 years has changed. And you say it's a movement towards re-education camps. That's what the real goal is in mind. Can you explain that?
I certainly can. The change has accelerated. Basically, the conception of the university I explained a moment ago involves liberals and some conservatives, very few conservatives, but there's been a mutual respect and a kind of the idea that we'll exchange these ideas within the arena in which we dwell. The left, the radical left, in the last 20 to 10 years, has been wanting to change the notion of what that arena consists of, so that arena will no longer exist. The problem emerges, and I'll go ahead and say it, from education schools of education. These are the least respected units on most college campuses, and they have been struggling to impose and extend their influence for many years, and they found a key to it. And the key to extending their influence on the college campuses, generally speaking, was to create a raft of graduate programs in student affairs, higher education management, educational leadership, and then to graduate these people not into academia as faculty, but to graduate them to come back into the side door of the university in the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy, and this is important for a very specific reason. Samuel Abrams at Sarah Lawrence College has noted that while the faculty is 6-1 liberal to conservative, the bureaucracies are 12-1 liberal to conservative. This is important because bureaucracies establish and control the milieu that students find themselves in. And they have as their goal to extend messaging 24/7 to college students in residence life, in dorms, in dining halls, wherever they have access to students. What is this ideology? Well, education schools were colonized a long time ago by crypto Maoists, with Henry Giroux, Michael Apple, Paulo Freire, all of them Marxists, acknowledged Marxists. And this ideology permeates education schools and has found a way out of education schools back into the university, where these bureaucrats extend their influence in what is called the co-curriculum. Now, most people that I've talked to outside the university have no idea what the co-curriculum is. Now, you and I teach in the curriculum. You have physics and chemistry and business and political science. Over here is the co-curriculum that is constructed by the student affairs bureaucracy. And this is a series of workshops and caucuses and a whole array of activities that are controlled by a group of people who adhere to a single ideology. Now, this is the problem that most people are really unaware of. And it's this bureaucracy that is what I think has been the motive force behind altering the university in the last 10 to 15 years, funded by, I should say that is influenced by and is caused by the education schools. Now, when the education schools put these bureaucrats into their positions, these people then coagulate, or should say congregate, off campus in what are called professional clubs. And these clubs are riven with ideology, and these clubs set the standards for what is taught in education schools. So you see a kind of a circle of vice. And this circle of vice was created about 15 years ago, and it is increasing its intensity, and it's increasing its influence. And this is the core of the problem that we find in higher education, the lack of ability to reform higher education.
And you just brought up several very interesting points, things that need to be flushed out more. Now, one of the things I will touch on is the idea of the progressive to conservative ratio on college campuses, as you pointed out, is 6-1. However, if you actually break it down in subject areas, so if you go into anthropology, it's like 85-0. If you go into sociology, it's about 65-1. Political science isn't too bad. It's only about 8-1. History is about 16-1. So we've seen the impact that has had, where you have professors teaching this virulent anti-American sentiment to the students, and we're seeing its impact. But you just brought up something even more important. And it's the idea of the student activities and the clubs that are going on campus, the indoctrination centers that exist. What many don't realize, and I think that this differentiates the university system from the community college system. So I teach in a community college system, and I have found it is far less political and ideological than the university system, and mainly because of that. Because commuter schools are community colleges where students aren't staying on campus all day, every day, 24/7. Some of them may engage in campus activities, but the vast majority have work full time. They may have to take care of children or elderly parents. So they're not, there's a much more even split amongst conservatives and progressives on community college campuses, where on the university system, the conservatives are far outnumbered. And one of the things, it's had a chilling effect, where we've seen conservatives self-censor themselves. And not just conservatives, it is now extending a little bit more leftwards, as left-leaning professors are now being targeted as well. So when we look at that, that's such a great point. As far as why the American people should care, how this actually bleeds out into the broader society, because I think that's the key. You know, people out there may say, well, you know what? I don't have kids in college anymore. My kids graduated. They're not in the college system, or my kids are so young, so I don't have to think about the college system. Can you just explain how this is bleeding out into the broader society?
Yeah, certainly. I think we all should be concerned about it, because it influences or impacts, determines the destiny of our country. The folks who are coming out of higher education now, the students who are graduating, I'll give you an example. We saw the campaign, the failed campaign Bud Light just engaged in. This people don't realize the senior vice president was a very young woman who had come out of Harvard. I'm not Harvard. Well, she came out of Harvard undergraduate school, and she came out of Wharton graduate, got her MBA at Wharton, and she's seeing more concerned with propagating the social engineering project rather than maintaining one of America's great brands that had grown. It was carefully crafted.
Business 101, know your audience.
Yes, it was marketing 101. Yeah, basically a brand that had been carefully crafted and built up over decades was destroyed in the period of about 36 hours. And she managed to do this by simply ignoring everything that we know about marketing and business and taking care of your customers, and that brands actually mean something. And she destroyed. Why did she do this? One of the reasons she did this was because she showed allegiance or fealty to a theory that she probably learned. I'm best guessing she learned it at Harvard and carried it on with her to Wharton. Wharton is an especially interesting case of how these young people are being, I guess, put out into society and then acting according not to the fundamentals of business, the fundamentals of what we know about economics and about politics and about society, but according to a theory that they learned in school that has no basis in reality. It's Wharton. I was just looking at the Wharton site the other day, and I look at a quote that they're highlighting on the Wharton book, and it was a young woman who was excited to become a Wharton MBA, and she's there, and the quote was, "I feel comfortable enough to make myself vulnerable." Now, that makes no sense. I would rather have someone who's going to learn some hardcore business principles and to act in a way that's going to take care of shareholders and ensure that the brand thrives and ensures that people are getting what they want at a price they're willing to pay. But here she's kind of a narcissistic kind of Generation Z attitude that, well, I feel so comfortable enough to be vulnerable. That makes no sense in the context of a business school or in itself. That's the kind of deleterious result that I'm seeing, that people feel it's okay to do this kind of public psychotherapy, self-psychotherapy, make these kinds of comments, and to think it's being profound or in some way. So I think we all should be concerned about the results of what's going on the college campus and who's in charge, who is calling the shots, because they're producing a generation of people just like this, like the woman who ran the Bud Light campaign, the woman I just mentioned to you on the Wharton website. More and more of these people are assuming positions of power and controlling what we see, and controlling largely and to greater extent what we do each day, the choices we have available to us. Rather than improving the human condition, I think that they are involved in doing something more nefarious.
And I think that's key, because what you're talking about is how this has been ongoing for quite some time. We're now seeing the effects of this, that these people go into these positions and they teach and indoctrinate the student body, knowing full well that one day these students are going to be the business leaders. They are going to become the policymakers. They are going to become the lawyers. And when we see this radical push, particularly with diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice, I mean, I've written numerous pieces on campus reform about this. Campus reform focuses on this. When you look at this push, how it's now part of almost every single degree requirement that exists, including in medical schools, to study to become an OBGYN, they are now trying to dilute what gender really means, and they're really doing a disservice to their own profession. Do you think that there's so much damage that the universities are inflicting on themselves, all self-inflicted wounds, that they're going to be facing a reckoning within the next few years?
One hopes that the reckoning is coming, and I'm hoping it's coming sooner than the next few years. I think we see some glimmers of what is possible happening in Florida, certainly happening in Texas and in Iowa. And I'm just delighted to see that there is a pushback on this and a rollback, if you will. I think that the diversity, equity, and inclusion is a special example, a special case of my PhD is in Soviet ideology, and I date myself with that because I came out of Duke University back in the late 80s, just as the Soviet Union was crumbling. So I know a great deal about Soviet ideology and how they utilized the bureaucracy to control institutions like the military. And I see DEI as a kind of a corollary analog of the old NKVD commissariat that controlled the military. You've got this separate hierarchy of people who are concerned not with education of young people, not concerned with producing wealth, not concerned with bettering the human condition, but concerned with ideological orthodoxy. And these persons in the DEI hierarchy, they don't really know anything. They don't really do anything except ensure the loyalty and the fealty and the knee-jerk, I would say, genuflections of the faculty and staff and students to a particular ideology, which is grounded in this Manichaean binary I mentioned earlier. That's what they do, up and down the line. It's not clear who they report to or what their powers are. Do they report to the department where they're assigned, or do they report to this hierarchy over here, very much like the NKVD officer, the political commissars used to do? And I think this is one of the most noxious aspects of this new regime that came out of, unfortunately, the death of George Floyd in 2020, ignited the left and made them bold. It emboldened them to push forward on a host of fronts, not just the DEI front, but a host of fronts to enact what they had always dreamed of. And in other words, transforming higher education. These are not intellectuals. These are not faculty. These are people who are occupy the bureaucrat positions. And one of the mottos of one of these off-campus groups that I've mentioned that sets the standards for education schools, the motto is boldly transforming higher education. Boldly transform. Now, who are these people that are boldly transforming higher education? No one asked them to transform anything. We just want them to make sure the sound system works and the pizza's hot. That's what their jobs are. And organized karaoke night and an ultimate game of frisbee, game of ultimate frisbee, and yet here we find themselves climbing this ladder of the self-description of we're college educators too, and we're going to establish a co-curriculum of fake faculty, fake courses, fake transcripts. Even we have Rutgers and St. John's giving these fake transcripts for these fake courses taught by these fake faculty, and people are simply unaware that this is what is happening. Even my faculty colleagues, God bless them, many of them continue to cast their gaze off the campus at the far right, at state legislators who simply don't understand these deep issues, perhaps even a Bible thumper or two, parents who don't really understand the issues. This is who they're focused on.
Domestic terrorists.
Yeah, yes, they're focused on these folks over here when the enemy is already inside the wire, right behind them. They despise faculty. They want to be faculty too. They're upset because they can't be faculty. And so they teach these fake classes and they call themselves at their conferences college educators. I've read their material. I've read their books. It's really a pathetic enterprise all the way around. But the problem is that they have a lot of power. And they have this 12-to-1